What would you do if the only food you had was meant for someone who hadn't eaten in 2 days, but that someone was a man everyone else mocked? Esther was only 24, but life had already taught her the hardest lessons. Orphaned at a young age, she had no family, no inheritance, and no one to fall back on. She lived alone in a tiny room with no electricity, no clean water, and barely enough to eat. Yet every morning before sunrise, she got up, tied on her faded apron, and walked to her roadside food stall in Lagos, determined to make a living with dignity. Her food stall wasn't much, just old wooden planks and rusted sheets nailed together under a tree. But it was hers. With a smile that didn't quite hide her exhaustion, she served hot rice, beans, and yam porridge to hungry strangers. Most paid her, some didn't, but she never turned anyone away, especially not the crippled man everyone called dirty, crazy, or worse. They called him Papa J. He was a silent figure in a broken wheelchair, wrapped in dirty bandages, smelling of sweat and street dust. Every afternoon he would roll up slowly to her stall, his wheels creaking painfully across the stones. People would cover their noses or cross the road. But not Esther. She greeted him warmly every time, sometimes with nothing but a smile and a simple, "You're here again, Papa J." One day he came to her, starving, unable to even beg. Esther had only one plate of food left. That was supposed to be her own dinner. She paused, hesitated, then pushed the plate in front of him with a gentle nod. "Eat," she said. No speeches, no pity, just pure kindness. Why? Because in her heart, she believed something few do. If I were in that wheelchair, wouldn't I want someone to feed me too? She didn't help him for recognition. She didn't post it online. She never even asked his name. Day after day, she gave him food from what little she had. People mocked her, some warned her, but she just smiled and said, "Crying doesn't fill the pot, helping does." In a world where people walk past suffering without a second glance, Esther made a different choice. She gave with no agenda. She showed kindness when it was inconvenient. And most of all, she treated a man others ignored like a human being. But what she didn't know was that this simple act, this repeated moment of compassion, was about to change her entire life. So what happens when the person you helped turns out to be someone the world respects and fears? Stay with us because the next part of Esther's story will shock you. They laughed at him, called him mad and filthy, but one girl knelt beside him, called him Papa J, and gave him food with a smile. Why? Where every afternoon in the dusty streets of Lagos, a familiar sound echoed down the cracked pavement. Creak, creak, creak. It was the sound of an old wheelchair, dragged forward slowly by tired hands. The man who pushed it was known to everyone, but respected by none. His name, if he even had one, had long been forgotten. Most people just called him that cripple, the dirty man, or the crazy beggar. But to one person, just one, he was Papa J. Esther, the young food seller at the corner, never flinched when he approached. While others covered their noses or crossed the road, she would wipe her bench, scoop up a hot plate of rice or yam, and walk straight to him with a smile. "Papa J, your food is ready," she would say gently. He never begged, never raised his voice, never stretched out his hand. He simply sat in silence, legs wrapped in old bandages, head bowed, eyes tired and hollow. His clothes were ripped, his face covered in dust, and his body smelled of street life. Some said he hadn't bathed in months. Others said he was insane. But Esther saw something else, a human being in pain. She never asked where he came from or why he never spoke. She never cared about his smell, his silence, or his torn clothes. When she had one plate left and her stomach growled from hunger, she still gave it to him. Her answer was simple. If I were in that wheelchair, I'd want someone to care too. Day after day, Esther repeated the same quiet act of kindness. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know why he always came back. She only knew he was hungry, and that was enough. One day someone asked her, "Why do you always feed that beggar? He's not even thankful." Esther looked up and answered, "Kindness isn't a business. I'm not waiting for returns." What no one knew, what not even Esther knew, was that behind the silence, behind the grime and dust, Papa J was watching. Not just watching, but listening, feeling, remembering. Because Papa J wasn't just a beggar, and Esther's kindness wasn't just kindness, it was a test. In a world where value is measured by status, money, and looks, Esther gave value to someone who had none of those things. Her heart recognized something most people overlook: the worth of a soul, no matter how broken the body it lives in. She didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. Because the man everyone looked down on, he had a secret, and the girl who called him Papa J was about to discover just how powerful one small act of compassion can become. Would you give your last meal to a man who can't even say thank you? Esther did, and she never imagined who he really was. Esther didn't have much. In fact, on most days, she barely had enough to feed herself. But what she lacked in wealth, she carried tenfold in kindness. Living alone in a tiny room behind her food stall in Lagos, she had no electricity, no running water, and no safety net, only a heart that refused to harden. Each day she cooked with trembling hands and hopeful prayers. Her meals weren't fancy, just simple dishes of rice, beans, and yam porridge. But what she served was cooked with care, stirred with humility, and spiced with silent resilience. Then came Papa J, the man in the broken wheelchair who rolled down the road each afternoon like clockwork. His clothes were torn, his legs were bandaged and twisted, his eyes looked tired from life, and his voice was barely audible. He didn't beg, he didn't reach. He just sat, watching the world go by. People said he smelled. Some mocked him openly. Others crossed the road when he appeared. But Esther saw him differently. She called him Papa J with affection, even when others called him crazy or useless. One afternoon, Esther had only one plate of food left. It was hot, fresh, and meant for her. Her stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten all day. But then she saw Papa J sitting in the same spot, quieter than usual, head lowered like he hadn't slept in days. She looked at the plate, then at him, and without a word she gave it away. "Here," she said softly, placing the meal in front of him. "Eat." Papa J didn't thank her. He just stared at the food, then at her, his hands trembling as he lifted the spoon. No one clapped. No one filmed it. And Esther didn't wait for praise. She simply smiled and said, "I can cook again when I get home." But the truth was, there was nothing left to cook. Why did she do it? Because her kindness wasn't a transaction. It wasn't earned. It wasn't calculated. She gave because she believed that if she had just one thing to offer and someone else had less, then giving was the right thing to do. People watched her in disbelief. One woman asked, "Why do you always feed that man?" Esther replied, "If I were in that wheelchair, wouldn't I pray for someone to feed me too?" In a world so obsessed with receiving, Esther gave again and again. She didn't know who Papa J really was. She didn't care if anyone saw him. Her kindness wasn't waiting for reward, but what she didn't realize was that someone was watching, someone who had the power to change everything. Because when you give from nothing, expecting nothing, that's when life gives back the most. And Esther's life, it was about to take a turn no one, not even she, could have imagined. What happens when the person you fed with your last meal suddenly vanishes, without a word, without a trace? For weeks, Esther had followed the same rhythm: cook in the morning, serve food all afternoon, and watch as Papa J slowly rolled up in his creaking old wheelchair, tired and silent. She had come to expect him, not because he ever asked for anything, not because he spoke much, but because somehow his presence had become part of her day. But that morning felt different. The sun had risen like usual. Esther had swept in front of her wooden stall, scrubbed the bench, and lit the fire to boil water for the rice. She glanced at the corner of the road, expecting to hear the familiar creak, creak, creak. But there was nothing. Just the wind. Just silence. "He's probably just late," she whispered to herself, forcing a smile. By noon, her heart had started pounding. She looked down both ends of the street. No sign of the old wheelchair. No Papa J. She asked Mama Titi, the woman who sold vegetables nearby, "Did you see Papa J today?" Mama Titi just laughed, waving her hand dismissively. That man? Maybe he rolled off somewhere else. He's always crawling around. But Esther didn't laugh. She couldn't. By evening, worry had replaced her smile. She asked the water vendors, the bike men, even the children selling candy nearby. None of them had seen him, and when she returned to her small room that night, she didn't cook. She sat by the empty plate she had saved for Papa J, the one she thought he'd use that day. She stared at it for hours. The next day came, and still he didn't show up. Her cheerful greetings to customers became quieter. Her energy dropped. Even the smell of her signature jollof rice made her stomach twist. Something wasn't right. Esther wasn't just missing a beggar. She was missing someone. Someone who had never spoken loudly, but had somehow filled a space in her world with quiet, constant presence. Someone everyone else walked past, but who had quietly become her routine, her duty, and her unexpected companion. She held the plate he last used, tracing its edges with her fingers. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Even when it rains, he never misses a day. Even when he's sick, he comes." And now, he was gone. Not knowing where he was or if he was okay hurt more than she expected. It wasn't just about giving food anymore. It was about connection, about loyalty, about seeing someone no one else saw and fearing she may have lost him for good. But what Esther didn't know was that this silence was only the beginning. Because in that moment of absence, fate was preparing something bigger than she could imagine. And the man she fed out of pure compassion, he wasn't gone. He was just getting ready to change her life forever. What would you do if a stranger handed you a sealed envelope, and inside was an invitation that could change your life forever? It was just another hot afternoon in Lagos. Esther had finished serving rice to her last customers and was wiping her bench when it happened. A black car pulled up in front of her tiny wooden stall, its engine humming smoothly, the tires too clean for these dusty streets. Out stepped a tall man in polished shoes, wearing a bright red cap and expensive clothes that didn't belong anywhere near this neighborhood. He didn't smile. He didn't greet. He simply walked up to her table and, without a word, handed her a brown envelope. Esther blinked, confused. "What is this?" she asked, holding the envelope with two hands. The man looked her straight in the eyes and said firmly, "Read it, and don't tell anyone." Then he turned, walked back into the black car, and drove away, leaving only silence and questions behind. Her hands trembled as she opened the flap. Inside was a single folded paper. No name, no long message. Just 8 handwritten words in bold, clean letters. "Come to Green Hill Hotel by 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. From a friend." Esther read it 3 times. Green Hill Hotel? She had never been to a hotel before, let alone one with a name that sounded like it belonged in a movie. Her heart raced. Her mind flooded with questions. Who sent this? What kind of friend? Why now? She looked around. The road was empty again. No one had seen the man. No one saw the car. It was like the entire moment had come out of a dream or a trap. She clutched the envelope to her chest. The sun burned above her, but a cold breeze blew across her skin. Her instinct told her this wasn't just another random note. This meant something big. By 3:30 p.m., she was standing in front of her small wooden stall, holding the key in her hand. Her fingers shook as she locked the door. "God, please go with me," she whispered, swallowing her fear. She flagged down a tricycle and quietly said the words that felt foreign in her mouth. Green Hill Hotel. The city passed by in a blur. Buses honking, children running, smoke rising from food stalls. But Esther didn't notice any of it. Her eyes were locked on the envelope in her lap. Her mind was spinning. Who would invite a poor food seller to a luxury hotel? And why in secret? She had no fancy clothes, no makeup, just her patched dress, her dusty slippers, and a heart full of nervous wonder. But deep inside, something told her. This day was different, because sometimes life doesn't knock. It sends an envelope. And if you dare to open it, everything you thought you knew about yourself, about your worth, about your destiny, might just change forever. She thought he was a crippled beggar, But when she opened that hotel door, everything she believed turned upside down. Esther's heart pounded as she stepped into the luxurious lobby of Green Hill Hotel. The glass doors closed behind her with a quiet whoosh, sealing her inside a world she'd only seen in movies. Marble floors gleamed beneath her worn-out slippers. The chandelier above sparkled like a sky full of stars. Her breath caught in her throat. A man in a black suit appeared. "Come with me," he said simply. Esther followed him down a long, quiet hallway. Her legs felt weak. Her palms were sweating. Her mind was racing with fear and questions. What was this place? Why was she here? Who had brought her? Then the man stopped at a tall wooden door. "Someone is waiting for you inside." Esther stared at the door, unable to move. But something inside her whispered, "Go on." She took a deep breath, pushed it open, and froze. There, sitting in the center of a grand room, was Papa J. But this was not the Papa J she knew. Gone were the dusty bandages and tattered clothes. His face was clean, his hair neatly combed. He wore a crisp white shirt with golden buttons and a polished wristwatch. His wheelchair gleamed under the light, modern and elegant. Esther's mouth dropped open. "Papa J?" she gasped, barely able to speak. The man smiled gently. "Yes, Esther, it's me." She stood still, overwhelmed. He wasn't weak. He wasn't sick. He looked powerful. "Please sit," he said, pointing to the chair across from him. Still in disbelief, Esther sat down slowly. "My name," he continued, "is not really Papa J. It's Chief George. I am the CEO of multiple companies. A billionaire." Esther blinked rapidly. "A billionaire?" she repeated, stunned. Chief George nodded. "Yes, I've built schools, hospitals, businesses. But I grew tired of fake people. I wanted to meet someone kind, someone who would help not because of who I am, but because it's the right thing to do." He looked directly at her. "You gave me food when you had none. You gave without asking. You never laughed at me, even when I looked broken. That is why you're here." Tears welled up in Esther's eyes. "I didn't help you for anything," she whispered. I just couldn't ignore someone who needed help." Chief George leaned forward. "That's why I chose you. Every year I test people. I disguise myself to find those with true hearts. You passed the test, and now I want to reward you." Then slowly, something unbelievable happened. Chief George stood up. Esther gasped. You can walk?" He smiled. "I always could. But I wanted to know, who would care when there's nothing to gain?" And in that moment, Esther realized the kindness she thought no one noticed had been seen all along. Because real generosity doesn't need a stage. It only needs a moment and someone willing to act. And Esther, she did. What if the meal you gave out of love came back as $1 million gift with your name on it? Esther could barely breathe as Chief George stood before her, tall and confident, no longer the broken man she had once fed on the side of the road. Everything she thought she knew had changed, and now her world was about to shift again. "You're one of 10 people I choose each year," Chief George said calmly. "People who show kindness without asking for anything in return. People who give, even when they have little." Esther sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "But I'm nobody," she said softly. Chief George smiled. "That's where you're wrong. The world tells you you're nobody because you're poor. But your heart tells a different story. You gave when it hurt. You gave without cameras, without applause, without promises. That's everything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "Come with me," he said. Still stunned, Esther followed him through the wide hotel hallway, flanked by 2 silent bodyguards in black suits. When they stepped outside, her eyes widened in disbelief. 5 black SUVs lined the entrance like something out of a presidential convoy. Chief George opened the first door and smiled. "Get in, Esther." She hesitated, her legs shook, but she obeyed. The ride was quiet. Her heart thudded in her chest. Every street they passed looked more expensive than the last. Then finally the cars turned onto a quiet road with clean sidewalks, shining buildings, and flower-lined fences. When they stopped, Esther stepped out and gasped. In front of her was the most beautiful restaurant she had ever seen. A tall building with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, golden handles on polished doors, smooth white marble walls, lush green plants blooming around the entrance. And above the front door, in big, elegant letters, Esther's Place, home of sweet meals. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, this can't be real," she whispered. Chief George smiled. "It's real. It's yours." Esther's legs gave way and she dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she asked. "Why me?" He knelt beside her, his voice low and steady. "Because when the world ignored me, you didn't. You saw a human being, and now I want the world to see you." He placed the silver key in her trembling hand. "This restaurant is fully yours, paid in full, staffed, and ready to run. You will never have to struggle again." Esther looked up, her cheeks wet with tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied gently. "Your actions already spoke for you." And with that, the girl who once gave away her last plate of food was now the owner of a restaurant fit for kings and queens. Because when kindness is given with a pure heart, the universe always finds a way to give it back, tenfold. She went from feeding one beggar on the street to feeding hundreds across a city. But fame never changed her heart. Kindness did. The sign outside read, "Esther's Place, home of sweet meals," and the building shimmered in the morning light like a palace of dreams. Shiny glass windows reflected the busy Lagos streets. The marble floors inside gleamed. The air smelled of fresh bread, spices, and elegance. Esther's name was etched in gold on the office door upstairs, and her photo, smiling, graceful, full of quiet strength, hung proudly in the hallway. She had come a long way from her wooden food stall beneath a tree. She no longer cooked over an open fire. She didn't need to wipe down old planks or serve food with her hands. Trained chefs now worked in her kitchen, dressed in crisp white coats. Waiters moved with quiet professionalism. Music played softly in the background. Guests came in luxury cars and left with full stomachs and glowing reviews. But one thing had not changed. Esther. Despite the wealth, the comfort, the recognition, her spirit remained untouched by pride. She hadn't forgotten the dusty streets. She hadn't forgotten the hunger in her belly or the trembling hand of Papa J. She hadn't forgotten what it felt like to give from nothing and how that simple act had rewritten her destiny. So she created something bigger than a restaurant. She launched a mission. Every week, without fail, a large white food truck rolled out of the restaurant parking lot. Painted across the side in big blue letters were the words, "Esther's Food Love, Feeding the Hungry." The truck stopped under bridges, beside bus stops, and outside crowded markets. Poor families, homeless children, and elderly street vendors gathered with hopeful eyes. And there she was, Esther, no longer in rags, but still kneeling beside the weak, still offering food with both hands. "Eat well," she would say softly. "You are not forgotten." One afternoon, a young man helping load food asked her, "Madam, why do you still do this? You're rich now. You don't have to be here." Esther turned to him, touched her chest gently, and replied, "Because kindness brought me here. So kindness must go with me wherever I go." It wasn't about charity, it was about memory, about honoring the road that led her here, and the silent promise she made to herself the day Papa J vanished. "If I ever have more, I will give more." The sun often set on Esther smiling at the back of her truck, watching children laugh over warm bowls of rice, seeing old men bless the food with shaking hands. Her heart stayed full, not from money, but from meaning. She had discovered a truth many spend a lifetime searching for. Success isn't what you build, it's what you give, and who you become in the giving. And long after her restaurant became a landmark, long after her name became known in business circles, Esther remained simply the girl who gave. And in doing so, she became unforgettable. She thought she was just helping a hungry man, but her kindness planted a seed that would grow into a miracle. Esther didn't give to be seen. She didn't give because it was easy. She gave because it was right. Long before the silver keys, the marble floors, and the sparkling chandeliers of Esther's place, there was only a broken wheelchair, a plate of warm beans, and a quiet girl who believed one simple thing: no one deserves to go hungry. In a world that often rewards appearances and ignores the invisible, Esther saw through the dirt and silence of a man others mocked, and saw a soul. She didn't ask Papa J where he came from. She never questioned his silence. All she did was cook a little extra food and offer it with a smile. She could never have imagined that this quiet act, done under the hot Lagos sun, with shaking hands and an empty stomach, would echo across her future like a miracle waiting for the right moment. But that's the thing about kindness. It never dies. It moves quietly, through time, through people, through pain, and circles back when you least expect it. What began as a small roadside meal turned into a restaurant that fed hundreds. What started with a single wheelchair became a convoy of food trucks. And what was once just a poor girl's quiet compassion became a beacon of hope for an entire city. And Esther? She never let it change who she was. She didn't use her fame to boast. She didn't use her wealth to dominate. Instead, she used her story to remind others of what truly matters: integrity, compassion, the courage to care even when no one else does. One day, a journalist asked her, "What do you think was the moment everything changed?" Esther smiled and said, "It didn't happen in the hotel. It didn't happen when I saw the keys. It happened the first day I looked at a man in a wheelchair and said, 'You matter.' That was the real turning point. And that's the truth this story leaves behind. You don't need millions to change a life. You don't need power to make a difference. You just need a heart that's willing." So if you're watching this, wondering whether what you give matters, whether your small acts of good in a hard world mean anything at all, remember Esther. Remember that when you choose kindness over judgment, giving over keeping, and love over fear, the world shifts, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. Because kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back to you, often in a form more beautiful than you ever imagined. You never know who needs your kindness, or how far your smallest act of compassion might travel. When this isn't just a story about a girl named Esther, it's about you and the choices you make when no one is watching. You may not own a restaurant. You may not have a shiny key handed to you by a billionaire. You may not even feel like your life is on the right path. But here's the truth. You don't need a stage to make an impact. You just need a heart that chooses kindness. Esther's journey wasn't about luck. It wasn't about who she knew. It wasn't even about being noticed. Her entire life changed because she did one thing. She helped someone when it was inconvenient, when she had nothing, and when no one else would. That's what made all the difference. Maybe right now you feel like what you do doesn't matter. Maybe you feel invisible, like your generosity goes unseen, like the love you give is ignored. But let this story be your reminder. Nothing done with love is ever wasted. The world might not applaud you today. People might not say thank you. But the energy you give out, the compassion, the grace, the selflessness, it finds its way back to you, just like it did for Esther. You don't have to be perfect to change a life. You don't need money to offer dignity. Sometimes a smile, a meal, a quiet act of care is enough to rewrite someone else's tomorrow. And here's something even more important. Someone out there may be waiting for you to be their Esther. So if this story touched your heart, share it. Not because it's content, but because it's truth. And someone, somewhere, may be one kind gesture away from believing in the world again. Leave a comment below. What did this story make you feel? Have you ever been in Esther's shoes? Or maybe even in Papa J's? We read every message because these stories aren't just told to be remembered. They're told to connect us all. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because more stories like this are coming. Stories that remind us of what it means to be human. Sometimes the world feels too loud, too fast, too cruel. But in moments like this, we pause, we reflect, we feel, and we remember. There's still goodness left. You are part of that goodness. Thank you for spending these moments with us. And always remember, kindness isn't weakness. It's the quiet power that changes everything. In a world that often overlooks quiet kindness, the story of Esther reminds us that true wealth lies not in what we own, but in how we treat others. Her simple act of feeding a stranger, even when she had little herself, teaches us that compassion does not require riches, only a willing heart. For those of us in the later seasons of life, this story reaffirms something we've always known deep down. It's not fame or fortune that defines a life well lived, but the love and dignity we offer to others in their lowest moments. Whether we have much or little, every small gesture matters. A kind word, a warm meal, or a listening ear might be the very thing that restores someone's hope. And even if no one sees it now, the universe remembers. Kindness has a way of returning to us, sometimes in ways we could never imagine. Let us continue to give, not because we expect something in return, but because it is who we are. And in doing so, we leave behind a legacy that speaks louder than words, a life of meaning, grace, and quiet strength.